Now, I work in a national park as a park ranger, and I remembered something that happened one evening. I'd went out near our station to drink my coffee. It's kind of a ritual that I had, and it was important for me to stay awake and alert enough to do my job effectively at night, when I hear a really loud crash. Now, not even 1 feet next to me, a huge boulder smashes into the ground. It scares me how close it is, and I jump back. Before I really have time to react to this, I hear somebody shouting at me, "Hey, watch out. The aliens are coming, man. The aliens are coming. You have to hide." And then I see somebody with a very long beard, very unkempt hair, a very old hat and clothes who sprints past me. He sprints so quick that I honestly don't think he's human for a second. Now, I stood there completely grounded. I want to say I was brave, but I just realized that this guy was probably trying to kill me with the rock. Within a second, I snap into life and I quickly get into the station, report what's just happened and call the police, and we send out our search party. Now, our party found absolutely nothing and nor did the police, so that crazy person could still be out there waiting to throw rocks at people's heads and kill them. I'm just glad that he missed me. Me and a buddy of mine had been called out to go and investigate a tent that was put somewhere it shouldn't have been. You're not supposed to camp in this part of our forest, and there was an old army green tent set up. We're almost there when my buddy stops and says, "Hey, can you hear that?" I say, "What?" I can then very faintly make out the sounds of somebody singing. The more and more I listen to it, it's children singing Ring-a-Ring-a Posies. It sounds like maybe 4 or 5 of them. They all have different voices. This goes on for about 2 minutes, very faintly. I turn on my flashlight and have a look around in all directions. We cannot locate where the sound is coming from. It sounds like it's right next to us. We turn off the flashlights again and it stops, and we think maybe it's coming from the tent. Quite scared now, we go closer and closer to the tent until somebody emerges. We say, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here." He says, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I just needed to rest for a bit." And the guy was actually really nice and said that he didn't realize he wasn't supposed to be. We then ask him, does he know where the singing was coming from? And he looks at us and says no, he was about to ask the same question. He packs up his things and we show him the way back because it's dark. We start to set off and we hear children laughing, just like before. Now, the look of fear I've never seen in the other guys before. I must have had the exact same expression as we realize that something is off. We quickly scan the torches around and very quickly scan the area and can't find anything. We then make it hurriedly back to our relative safety. I did some research at the area and apparently there have been reports of similar things happening before. Children laughter in the night, but nobody's ever able to locate where the sound comes from or the accompanied singing. This is not my story, but my father's of when he was a park ranger. He absolutely loves the job. He describes to me how that you could see some of the most beautiful things in the world out there in nature that you almost become completely blind to when you live in a big city. We do live in a big city now, but we're going to change to live elsewhere soon. Now, my father tells me of one experience which really shook him up. Apparently, they kept on finding dolls scattered around. I mean, literally, just randomly there would be these dolls that they would see. They didn't know why it had got there or who put them there, and they seemed to be quite old. In fact, ancient, almost like they were 100 years old. They'd all be dressed exactly the same with a black dress on and short black hair. They always thought it was weird, but didn't know if somebody had left it there, so they'd just put them under trees. Now, my father had to survey a certain area for something that they were going to build, and he said that he had no problem doing this. Apparently it was such a beautiful day. There was beautiful Red-coloured flowers at the ground where he was walking, and the sun was shining very high in the sky. He said he couldn't have felt better. There was a beautiful lake to his left and these gorgeous trees around him. He said, "This is it. This is what made it for me. Moments like this. No one around, but just the trees, breathing in the freshest air that you can and just forgetting about everything." Saying that most of the time that he was in these states, it was almost like meditation, and his mind could wander peacefully through the surroundings around him. He's making his way over to the area that he has to survey, and suddenly the beautiful scenic nature changes and a heavy feeling comes over him. He said he can't quite describe it, and he felt abnormally cold. He doesn't normally feel cold when he's out here. He decides to step into the sunlight, and weirdly, he feels the same. He knew something was off now, and he takes a few moments just to scan his horizon and figure out what's going on, but he can't find anything. Thinking this is very bizarre, he stops for even longer now and takes in a few deep breaths to calm himself when a blood-curdling scream makes his chest reverberate violently. Apparently it took a few seconds for him to come back to normal, and he said that he felt the blood leave his body. He looked around trying to figure out just what on earth this could possibly be, and then he sees it. A doll has been placed on top of, I kid you not, probably almost 100-foot tree. How on earth that got up there, my dad does not know. And the weirdest thing is that it's facing towards him. He then said that immediately he got out of there. He said that he had to jog away for so long that his legs were killing him, and he had to just keep on pounding to get enough adrenaline so he wouldn't feel it. He said that he went to explain it to some of the other guys, and somebody who had also seen the dolls looked pretty concerned and said he would go back to investigate with him. Now they get back to that exact same spot, and what do you know, the doll isn't there. But this isn't where it ends. There's another doll in another tree way too high up for it to possibly have been put there by anyone. They never could explain it. Now my dad also has another similar experience, which was very scary to him too. He said that it was only about a month after this incident happened. Now apparently, all of the dolls eventually just disappeared and they didn't know where they went or why. But apparently when a group of them was still doing some surveying, they heard that scream, the one that my father had before, and again, all of them stopped dead in their tracks. They can tell that it's coming from somewhere towards the water, but none of them want to go. One of them, who has binoculars, says that you've got to look at this. Tell me exactly what you see. And my dad looks through the binoculars and can't see it at first until my friend guides him there. And they see another doll just floating in the center of the lake. They actually decided to leave the area this time and vowed to not investigate the dolls, and they knew something was off. After this, they didn't have another sighting of one, and they never could solve exactly what it was. Now, for the last story from my father, it's a pretty creepy one. Now, apparently, my dad was training somebody new, and he said to stop up here for a moment, and the other guy threw his bag down. Crash. A really loud metallic sound suddenly reverberates through them. They were both frozen into the spot and can't figure out what it is, and my dad says, "What on earth do you have in that backpack?" They then both look down and suddenly realise that somebody's put a bear trap on the trowel. They were literally only milliseconds away from treading on it, and unfortunately it's got the new guy's bag. Because of the location of it, it could only have possibly been put there intentionally. But who on earth would have put a bear trap on the trowel for somebody to stumble upon? Or maybe they were targeted. They did a good thorough search of the area, but unfortunately could never find anything else. It still haunts my dad to this day, and he's still quite paranoid about where he steps if he's in a new territory. I've done lots of different things in my time, and I've kind of lived lots of different lives, I guess you could say. I'm always one who's up for adventure and trying new things that are different and unique to me, and I find those very exciting. I have landed a current career which I'm in and a job that I actually quite like. So is my wife too, which is great, but I didn't always do this job. I was talking to a new colleague at work and we got talking about what kind of jobs we're doing before, and it really got me thinking. Yes, of when I was a park ranger, the reason that you're all here listening to this. Well, for a few years after finishing my school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and there was a program that would send me to a different state. Long story short, I ended up staying there and I actually really like it. I'm actually still here today. After a couple of years of being in the state, I ended up signing up to become a park ranger. I actually had a few jobs though at the same time to get more money. I wanted to save up enough to be able to go to college, and luckily I was able to eventually, which is my career I have now. But at the time it seemed like worlds away, and I actually become a waiter. I hadn't done it before and the pay was not the best, but the good thing is we got lots and lots of tips and that was pretty cool. The problem with the job is that it's almost like if you did enough mistakes they would just get rid of you very quickly, but it was easy to do in a high-paced environment like this. Sometimes you literally couldn't even go to the bathroom, which I think was a bit ridiculous, but hey, it is what it is. I loved this job, and I really liked the environment. I remember when we'd wake up, there were some large animals like deers and things like that would always come up to where we were staying in the main facility. You actually had to be really careful of them sometimes, especially if it was their rut season when they were looking to reproduce, because the males would get very aggressive, and you had to be careful. The other problem too is tourists would always stop their cars and try and take pictures and stuff, but they were just kind of oblivious to the danger of it all. And yeah, it was actually really dangerous to be there, so you well and truly had to watch out. Now I didn't mind though, but like I said, the job didn't pay that much money, but it was very close to my other job which I absolutely loved, which was being the ranger. I found it good, but I almost feel like I was doing so much that I couldn't appreciate the things that I had around me. It's something I still have now, but it was almost like I was a spring compressed and I couldn't really appreciate everything for what it was. But as soon as I got out there doing my ranger job, I'd very quickly forget about the stresses of being a waiter, and that was good. I could also soon forget the fact that being a waiter wasn't a permanent thing. It was kind of like temporary for the time, and I knew that, just I couldn't convince my brain of it. So I head out on some of my normal patrols and everything's grand. There's lots of people out here that I actually become friends with, and I'd get some regulars there who would just hike the trails. It was a pretty cool place to go hiking if you ever get out to these kinds of places, and I'd really recommend it to people who haven't tried it yet. I remember though, there was some weird smell that none of us could seem to escape from. It was almost like sulfury, but kind of different, almost metallic at the same time. It's the kind of thing that was almost like sharp, and it would make your nose feel cold. It's pretty weird. I wasn't the first to discover it, but I wasn't the last, and I remember some other staff reported it too. Apparently this actually happened in other places and not far from the restaurant that I was waiting in. And I thought, you know what, this is a bit weird. I was quite paranoid and thinking too scientifically in the presumption that it was a dangerous chemical that we weren't supposed to smell but could, or something leaking from the ground. I was paranoid maybe it was radon gas, but I didn't realise that you couldn't actually smell that, and we're in the open air anyway. My scientific knowledge has come a long way since then. Now, eventually, the smells seemed to go away, and things seemed to return back to normal. I was finishing up one of my shifts doing the waiting, and I was washing some dishes, and I noticed something strange. Outside of the window, a bit further away, I could see some kind of faint glow. I don't really know how to describe it. It was almost like a reddy colour, but had more of a green tinge to it. At first I presume it's a fire, but it doesn't act like how a fire would. I don't know, it just felt a little bit different. It looked kind of weird, and a little bit creepy actually. I just convinced myself it was nothing. I finish up on my washing and go outside to see what it is, then I realise that it's gone. I'm pretty sure it's some kind of reflection or something that I didn't realise is there, so I just go back to what I was doing. I remember just thinking, God, I can't wait to just escape and let my mind settle. I was kind of aware of the compression spring thing that I was talking about earlier where I was doing too much, but I was kind of just going with it at the same time, but I knew I needed to get out of there and just have a few hours at least of peace just to clear this up. Now eventually, these smells do pick up again, and weirdly, somebody else reported seeing a strange light in these woods. Now, this particular colleague reported them differently, saying that it seemed to be coming as more of a green embery glow, almost like where a fire once was, or just when you get the embers before something like that's about to die. He said that he just had a weird feeling like something was off. It was like all of his adrenal glands were firing and he just didn't know why. He said the smell was accompanied by it too. So now, I'm pretty convinced that it's just something we should be careful of, but nothing too harmful. I was paranoid again it was radioactive, just because, like I said, not the best at science then. And I thought, well, why else would it be glowing? Or maybe it's some kind of chemical fire, I don't know. I thought somebody had been stupid and actually left something out there and not told us. Or maybe somebody was illegally burning trash or something. And yeah, that was what I went with and a lot of the team did. We were pretty sure people were burning some kind of plastic that they really shouldn't have been, and that would explain the weird characteristics of this light and its glow. Now the thing is, we couldn't find it. We searched for quite a long time, and my god, we get to know the area well, so if there was anything there that shouldn't have been, we would have picked it up, but we couldn't see anything. We even had some cops actually putting in a report that they thought somebody was out there, because they said they saw something strange. They described it as a couple of lights moving and then suddenly vanishing, describing it this time as a kind of purple colour with a green one, but the green remained throughout. I could probably link the colour more closely to almost like a neon kind of green, but it's hard to describe. Now, another strange characteristic of this is that one of my colleagues said that his eyes genuinely burnt when he saw this. He actually got the closest out of all of us to whatever this is. He said that he was probably about 50 feet away, and he couldn't look at it, almost like the way that you can't stare at the sun or bright reflections or things like that. But he said he felt enticed to. Almost like everything went black around him and he just had that to stare at. I even noticed some vision problems too. I remembered after seeing this that I would look at a tree and it just looked like it was artificially placed there, almost like it had a stage light coming down onto it which wasn't there, and it just looked too high definition compared to the other trees. It was kind of trippy but pretty bizarre to pick up, and some of the other colleagues had the same thing too. Weirdly, it was also the same people who smelt whatever that was. Now, in a weird way, I actually began looking towards having my night shifts because, well, I'm going to encounter something pretty cool out here. At least that's what I was telling myself. The sense and urge to have adventure was still quite strong at this point in my life, so I'm up for it. Didn't have a wife then, didn't have a kid, and not many responsibilities, and the world was absolutely my oyster at this moment in time. Now, what to do other than chase this thing? Well, nothing. So I set out. I made a commitment to myself that if I actually saw this thing and can get within touching distance, then I'm going to be the first. If my eyes hurt, then yeah, it's time to stop and go back, but I was ready. And then nothing. For the next 2 weeks straight, absolutely nothing happened. I actually grow more and more tired of trying to hunt this thing. It's kind of like the perfect anticlimax where that your motivation is going on a negative correlation, constantly spiraling down till you can't be bothered. And I couldn't be bothered. I was actually planning a trip to get away to Europe, and that starts to consume my thoughts and everything. And I decide that I'm gonna think better if I'm not tired and decide to plan it more in the day. So now I'm out there less in the dark anyway. So I'm doing my usual rounds, just investigating something that I needed to, and just going out, doing what we do, when I notice it. There's almost like a burning on my neck. It kind of feels like I'm getting a sunburn, and the smell has come back. I turn around slowly, and I see it, just for 1 second. Glowing almost too bright to be real, in a weird golden colour. Something is standing there raising its arms up to me. It doesn't really look like a person. It almost looks like it's wearing some kind of robes, but it doesn't have a head. I can describe them as white but with gold detailing around the side, but it looks very alien. Almost like something which has come from a very wealthy thing, but not like anything on earth, and something that's somehow spiritually higher than the rest of us. And then it vanished, almost like it was never there in the first place. I'm completely perplexed, trying to figure out what was that. I rub my eyes for a few seconds, and that's when I notice something really strange. I can still see the silhouette of this thing burned into my eyes while they go back to normal. Okay, that's really odd, I think. Something was definitely off about this situation. I'm pretty sure my head isn't powerful enough for me to imagine that, and I wasn't even thinking of it. Last time I checked, I'd never seen anything like this, so what was I seeing? I look around, and there's almost like a mist that's formed. It's kind of like an extremely light fog, but I can see it everywhere. Again, it's not just my vision going weird, because I can clearly see that it's not in all areas. So what was it? I decide to head back now. I ended up finishing the rest of my tasks, and I get into our base. I start talking during my lunch break and tell one of my colleagues about what happened. He said that he's seen something similar too. But what's more strange is that he said that he had seen this in a dream, which I think is really weird. I asked him to describe it, and he's pretty much describing literally exactly what I'd seen too. Now that's pretty creepy, I think. Or is it something higher up? We start to discuss all kinds of possible things, guardian angels and God knows what else, but I'm a little shaken. And I eventually get back into my car and drive home and forget about it and start another shift at the restaurant. Now when I'm doing the dishes this time, I can't help but look out of the window, and for a second I'm sure I see a green flash of light and then nothing. Now again, I think this is pretty bizarre, but I try not to think of it too much. I convince myself that I've been going too hard, pushing to the absolute max, and this is what's happened. My body's just gotten tired. Maybe I was doing too much. Maybe 2 jobs at the same time's not the best for me. Maybe, just maybe, I can slow down for a bit and life will take its hand for me. But I can't do that. I have to keep pushing. But I have to find out what this thing is. It's really starting to bother me now. I wouldn't say I'm naturally an anxious person, but I was starting to feel a bit weird about everything. It almost felt like these strange occurrences were becoming all-consuming. Kind of like the people you get on the ghost TV shows when they say that the ghosts don't leave them, or poltergeist, or, you know, them things. I was getting a bit worried now because I thought, well, why can't I separate from work? Why am I thinking of this while I go to sleep? Why am I seeing it in my head so much? I felt like time was against me and I just needed to get to the bottom of it. So I continue onwards once more. I continue on to another shift, and just as I do so, as I'm handing over from the other guys, they say, "Hey, did you hear about what happened?" I say yeah and talk about a sports event that happened recently, but they're like, no, the light, that thing that you saw, somebody else saw it. I say, what do you mean? And apparently Raymond has seen the same thing as me. He's one of the other staff there. Apparently, he was out there doing his role when suddenly, there's a bright light behind him. He turns around to see a tall figure wearing some white coloured gown, but this time associated with a more green glow. Again, can't see its face. It's too bright where its face should be, and it vanishes within a second. Now, I was happy I wasn't the only one seeing this, but apparently my colleague had actually got really shaken up by this, and that's somebody who never seems to care about much of anything. Well, I think I really want to find out what this is now. All of us agreed to stay well back and call law enforcement because clearly, if we encounter this thing, it's something that we're definitely not trained to deal with and don't want to deal with in the first place. Now me on the other hand, I'm the adventurer. I want to be the cool one who can just go after things and not be scared. It's weird thinking back now on how my mind was at the time, but that was my mind, so if I've got to investigate, then I've got to investigate. So I set out, and I start doing my job. Now again, things are normal. The next 3 days, nothing really happens. The only thing that was a bit weird was the mist seemed to pick up again, but because of the weather, I'm not really sure whether it is naturally occurring or not, but it felt strange. Now, on the 4th night, however, just as the sun goes down, I head out and something feels different now. It almost felt too perfect. The forest was a little bit too quiet compared to normal, and it kind of scares me. I don't know why, it just freaks me out. Something about it was just off. Now, as I set out, I almost have that feeling like when you're in a dream. You know when you get to that fatigue point where your brain's kind of shutting down but you're still going? It was kind of like that. And I'm met with the smell again. I'd genuinely forgotten about the smell for a long time, but here it is again. And it instantly wakes me up. The smell seems to be getting stronger and stronger as it goes deeper into the woods. Now this area that I'm in, you can't actually see much further around the bend because how the path twists. The trees are quite thick at this point in time, so you don't really have much time to react to things or people which will come up on the path or trail behind you. It's okay. Sometimes it's kind of comforting because you know it's the same for whatever else is out there. But this felt different this time. It kind of gives me an uneasy feeling like I need to know what's about to happen next. The smell is ever increasing to the point that I put my shirt over my nose and continue on like that. Luckily my undershirt's quite long so it reaches my nose easily. And I stop in my tracks as I can see a faint green glow. I can't figure out where it's coming from, and I suddenly realise that it seems to be from in all directions now. I realise that I must be right on the trail with this thing, and I continue on until eventually it seems like the green light is fading now. I look around once more, but there's still nothing here for me. Again, but that's when I see it. It's almost blindingly bright. I can see a much brighter glow this time. It seems to be coming from a specific location now and getting brighter every second, and I pivot myself and I'm able to see it now. I'm met with something that's about 7 feet tall, almost appearing to have some kind of green robe on this time, mixed with white and gold, far too bright, and clothes which are flowing as though that they're stuck in the wind but there's no wind. The closer up towards whatever this thing's face is, the brighter it gets and the more my eyes hurt. It does this to the point that I can't make eye contact with whatever this is, if it does have eyes that is. I get this horribly overpowering feeling that whatever this is far too superior to me and can literally do whatever it wants to me, and I can only be here, left to face it. Now I don't know exactly how long that I was stood there for, but it gets to the point that I physically can't look at it, and I actually drop onto the ground trying to cover my eyes. It's so bright that I can actually see my bones through my fingers, and just some red around where my skin is, and suddenly there's darkness. I think I went blind for probably about 5 or so seconds because of how bright this thing was, until I'm able to actually see again. I then quickly get up and look around, and everything's how it should be. Just the smell, that awful smell, is still there. I pick up quite a good pace, and I start running out of there fleeing. Luckily I was only about 20 minutes away from the station, and I get there in about 5 minutes or so. I was flat out exhausted when I get back to the station. Nobody else is there, and it's only me at this time. I very quickly write down everything that's happened, and I try my absolute best not to panic too much. Now, the more that I calm down, the more I can actually see what I'd seen in my head. For probably a millisecond, I was finally able to see this thing clearly, and it seems to have horns with gold tips at the end, and glowing eyes. I don't know what I'd seen, but it really terrified me. I ended up calling my best friend and describing what happened, and he said it might have been some kind of spirit that I encountered. I was very scared, and I actually radioed in to all colleagues in the surrounding areas to look out. Now what was really weird is I get a call to say that I've got to see my friend now. He doesn't say what's happened, but he says that I have to come quick, so yeah, that's exactly what I done. Now when I'm eventually able to make it over to him, that's when he tells me what he saw. He describes it as a tall figure, also with horns, kind of staring at him, and it was an incredibly bright thing and green coloured and glowing, and we both realised that what we saw was the exact same thing. Now in this moment I know that we have to keep going and doing our job, but we saw something really weird. We let everybody else aware of it, and we're hyper aware for what it could possibly be. Over the following weeks, there's fewer and fewer sightings of the glowing embers until eventually there's nothing. All these years later, I still have no idea what I saw to this day. I really hope that I don't ever have to see whatever that thing is again, because I don't think I'll be strong enough to stand to it this time. Now, in my later life, I ended up starting work as a ranger. Well, to be specific, I was on the fire lookouts most of the time, but with my job I had to alternate what I was doing. I'd like to share an experience from my past though that I haven't really been able to put my finger on. I've seen 1 or 2 strange things during my later life, but nothing really compared to this, and it's something that stayed with me. I never shared my experience with anyone because I was worried about being ridiculed, but I'd like to share it today. I'm somebody that used to go out into the woods a lot when I was younger. I used to do it more for fitness, to be honest. I found it was better if I could actually jog away from everyone because A, you wouldn't have to run into anyone, and B, I thought being out in the trees and with all the extra oxygen it's probably more healthy for me. And I've also done some research, well, at least I did at the time, to say that when you jog in the wild, you can also go across some better terrain, so apparently it's better conditioning and everything. Now, I didn't live very close to these areas, so I often had to hike over to them. It was okay though, I didn't have an issue with it. I found it to be a great time to clear my head. In fact, most of the times that I actually went jogging like this, it wasn't my original plan. It was instead something that kind of ended up just happening, you know. I'd go quite far, get close to where the forest started, and suddenly, I'd want to jog. And I did this on this particular day. Now, I decided not to jog immediately. Where I was, the terrain was pretty rough going, so I knew I was in prime area to twist my ankle. I'd actually done that before playing some sports, and it's never really been right. it can kind of go really weak suddenly. So if I was playing a sport and somebody tried to put a tackle in, I could suddenly fall to the ground and I didn't have much I could do about it. So with this in mind, I was being very cautious, just taking in everything. I thought I knew where I was going to, because I could see moss on the trees. Now I know that doesn't actually work really, but at the time I was convinced it would point north, so I kind of always thought I had a good sense of direction. The trees in this area are large and full of life, and that was a good thing. I was kind of walking across a hill at this point within the forest. It meant that if I fell, I could actually fall quite a long way down, and the trees also rose on my right side. So basically I didn't really want to jog here because I'm sure if I fell I'd get knocked out if I hit my head on a tree or who knows what. Now while walking, I noticed there's lots of wildlife around me that I haven't really noticed before. There's a few tiny birds that keep appearing on the track ahead of me, but they look pretty cool. I was worried that they were giant insects, but luckily it wasn't the case. For whatever reason, on this particular day, I decided not to jog immediately, or thereafter. I just decided that it's probably best if I walk and take in everything. I'm someone who likes to have deep thoughts. I realise now that I definitely overdid this and I was probably driving myself a bit insane with this process, but at the time it didn't really matter, because it was what worked for me. Now I didn't have that many good friends in my hometown. You had kind of like associates, I guess you would call them, but not the kind of people who would help you if you ever needed it. I had one friend, but he was pretty weird to be honest, and I was sort of aware of it at the time, but I wasn't able to actually leave him because there wasn't anyone else I could be friends with. I didn't realise this was stupid at the time, but it definitely was in the long run. I mean, pretty much all the time, all we would ever do is just go and watch a movie and order pizza. And there's nothing wrong with that, but when that's all you do, and you've also got someone talking rubbish about you behind your back, it can really throw you off. But I'm getting away from my story a bit much now. I come into another area where suddenly the sun pierces through and everything looks really beautiful. It was so bright it was kind of making the top of the trees appear white and the leaves almost transparent, which I thought was a really pretty thing. So I just continue on and take in the beauty of everything that's around me. I'm feeling pretty good at this point in time. Now, I come around the first bend and I realise that it levels off a little bit and I decide to start jogging. Now, I jog for a little while when suddenly I hear some people talking. I slow down to see who else is up here because I don't want to round a corner and run straight into somebody, but there seems to really be no one around. I can hear lots of people talking though. It sounds like about 6 or 7 or maybe 8, but I really can't make out a word they're saying. They're speaking alright, but I don't necessarily know what language it is. It's kind of like English, but different. I can imagine it's how English would sound to people that don't understand it. That's the best way I can describe it. I think, well, there's probably just a good old group of joggers out here, and I can't be bothered to go into them. Again, my aim with this was just isolation, which I know probably wasn't a good idea, but that's what I was looking for. All is going well, until suddenly, their tones of voice completely change and it sounds much more aggressive. I kid you not, I almost take my next step past the tree when I hear screaming. It really sounds like someone's being attacked or maybe even killed, and with that, I move in a flash. I guess the adrenaline and whatever hormones are associated with that take over, because I don't really have to think about what I'm doing. I keep running and running, and I almost come into a zone with it where I'm thinking of nothing else but putting as much ground between me and the people screaming as I possibly can. It really sounded like someone was being tortured. I'd never heard it before, but in this specific situation, I was certain that I just had. Now, I managed to run for about a good 4 or so minutes before I get tired. It's not easy to sprint, especially when you're not going in a straight line. I actually taste some blood and my lungs really burn at this point, and I know I have to slow down a bit. Stupidly, I brought headphones but not water, so obviously that wasn't a great idea. I ended up taking off the headphones and throwing them when they get kind of stuck around my neck. I never found them again. I was so scared though that I didn't care about ditching them like this. I thought it would make more sound, and I stop on a log that I can rest on. I remain diligently silent, yet nothing pierces the quietness around me. I start to relax a little and think, well, maybe somebody twisted their ankle or broke their leg. Yeah, it could just be that, I tell myself. I eventually think that I can hear somebody or something rushing through the trees now, and I decide to take cover. I don't call out and I don't want my presence to be known, so I quickly duck under a fallen tree. I kind of crouch over and hold my knees together, trying to keep my silhouette as low profile as possible. I'd heard about it on a military show, and I was trying to do this. Now the problem was I only had my shorts and stuff, so they could probably see me pretty easily. I wasn't really going to blend into the background that well, but it was better than nothing. Eventually I hear what sounds like somebody passing. Weirdly, it sounds like it passes straight ahead of me, but I don't see anything, and I think this is a little bit weird. I think maybe it's just some animal that was disturbed or being chased, so I think, well, I better press on now. I was just trying to get as far away as I could, and I knew that if I continued this way, there was a good chance that I could follow it around in a big kind of like circle, and eventually get back to the relative safety of exiting the tree line. I was looking forward to this because I was actually starting to feel a little bit shaky. Now it's worth mentioning that I wasn't actually shaking because of fear. I was actually getting a little bit shaky because I was quite hungry now, and I must have depleted all of my resources doing this. So I really wanted to get back. I realised that I have one kind of snack bar with me, and I devoured that instantly. God, it felt so refreshing in that moment. Eventually, my thoughts decide that they can settle in a bit, and the rational part of my mind takes over and says, hey, it's probably just a group of hikers who aren't from here, and one of them probably broke their leg. So I was constantly waiting to hear the sirens of an ambulance or something, just to put my fears to bed, but it didn't come, however. What did instead was the realization that all of my senses are being heightened. Now, I realized suddenly that there's a tree stand not too far from where I am. I think, God, wouldn't it be great if I went up that? I think at least now I can actually get a perspective of what's around and maybe calm myself down a bit, so I make my way over there. I seem to be acutely aware of everything though in this situation, and I take a few steps up the ladder for it, and I realise that I should probably step down again. I can hear something, and I can see movement of trees and foliage moving not too far off from my west. So I take off running. I'm doing a jogger's pace. Now, I'm quite quick to be honest at this, and I'm able to maintain it forever, so this is what I do. I'm not in enough of a panic state to start sprinting again, and I know that I'm not going to be able to sprint for too long, so I decide that this is probably the best thing that I can do now. Luckily, the trail that I'm on now is much more even, and there's not all big rocks everywhere that I can probably trip over, so I'm feeling alright. Now, I picked this pace up for quite a long time. It was probably about 20 minutes, and I'm literally halfway back to where I need to be now. But with a quick glance over my shoulder, I realise that there's still movement. And when I hold my breath for long enough, I can hear that there's something coming behind me. I keep up this pace, trying my very best to get away from whatever this is, but it doesn't seem to be losing me. And then, it's accompanied by more voices. It sounds like those people I heard earlier. They're not speaking very often, but almost chanting. It really sounds like an angry mob is coming after me, or whoever that is behind me, but it seems like the thing behind me is latched on. I jog probably for another 10 minutes, and I'm not that far away from where I need to be, and that allows me to let my guard down a bit. And I stop and turn around, ready to face whatever it is that's been after me. I think maybe it's some kind of crazed jogger that's out here, and they're trying to get them to safety. I just don't know what it is. But the moment I stop and turn around, like literally the second my back turns and I can see, suddenly there's nothing. Silence once again. Now I'm getting a little bit creeped out now, because I think, well, it probably wasn't no animals, but I guess it could have been, but why did they just stop? Which again makes me very aware that they seem to know where I am. Again, I could just be doing this through coincidence because of the path that I'm on, but something felt really weird. But suddenly the feeling of being followed escapes, and I decide that I should climb a tree. I know this is pretty weird to say, but for whatever reason I decide that I'm going to get a pretty good perspective of what this is, and I can probably get out of sight, especially if I can go high enough. I'm not a very good climber though, and this proves to be more of a challenge than I expected to find, but I'm able to do so. Now, eventually, I make it up the tree, and I decide just to stay here to catch my breath. I think it's called epoch or something, but it's when you have oxygen debt. I learnt about it a lot later, but basically my body was trying to get rid of the carbon dioxide, which had built up from running for so long. And I think the lactic acid has set in because my calves were absolutely obliterated now. I'm probably not the best in terms of actually having muscle mass, I'm still not. And I always thought this was going to be a higher association with things like this, but it felt like my legs were just absolute jello. I tried to move my legs around a bit now, but as I do so it makes the tree make a really loud sound. It's almost like something out of a comedy special, as I realise that my stupidity is starting to make the tree collapse on itself, or at least on the branch that I'm on, and I decide not to do that. But now, I can feel it. Something has locked onto me. It's kind of like a predator about to pounce, and I'm not the predator. I can hear something coming now, and I look around, and that's when I see it. I can only describe it as a person, but not how a person should look. What I was looking at was some kind of nightmarish figure. Where the skin should be is all red. There's no hair, just red everywhere, and some kind of liquid dripping off. And this thing with these horrible dark eyes makes eye contact with me and starts to walk towards my tree. I suddenly grip the tree extremely tightly, and I actually start bleeding from this but don't realise it. This thing starts walking towards me. I look around to see if there's any more, but as I turn back it's gone. I didn't realise it, but I went into complete shock at this. I actually slid halfway down the tree and eventually thud at the bottom. Without thinking about it, with my bloodied hands, I crawl over to a rock and hide under it. I don't know how long I was here for, but it took about an hour or so before I snapped out of it. I can't tell you what I'd described without tearing up in person, but it was like something from completely out of this world. Maybe it was a demon, I didn't know. I just knew it was time to get on the move again. This time when I get up, there's no uneasy feeling like I had before for some reason. I just feel completely drained, almost like a truck's hit me. Everything in my body hurt, and I was shaking. With my hands now shaking next to me, I pick up a light jogging pace, which eventually becomes a full sprint, until I get out of the woods. I couldn't bear to look behind myself, and instead, I just keep going forwards. I'm really shaking now, and for whatever reason, whenever I saw other people, it didn't bring any comfort to me, and everyone seems to be staring at me weirdly. Something just feels extremely off, and I can't stop thinking of that thing that I've seen the whole journey back home. I feel extremely paranoid, and I don't like that every person that I pass is staring through me, almost like I'm a ghost. Eventually I make it back home, I go to wash my hands off in the bathroom, and I realise that my face is extremely pale, and I haven't been able to close my mouth. I look like I was on drugs or something. I managed to go down and make myself some food, and I eventually crash out on my bed and fall asleep. I woke up the following day, and everything's as it normally is, with my mum making me some breakfast. My mum commented that she thought I was unwell, and asked what I'd been doing the previous day, because I shouldn't be that tired, and I couldn't bear myself to explain what I'd seen to her. Instead, I just say, "Oh, nothing, I just went on a big hike and hurt my ankle," and she says, "Oh, let me look at that for you." Now in this moment, I kind of go on autopilot with my replies, and I can't really think much about what my mum is saying to me. I just want to escape from what happened, and eventually, life went on, and I buried that in the back of my mind for a long time, even eventually becoming a ranger. But that thing, I'll never forget it. Sometimes when I'm on my fire watches, I actually get really paranoid that I'm going to see that again. I don't know if anybody knows what that could have possibly been, but I'd be very interested to know if anybody's had any similar experiences to that. I can only describe it as a demon that escaped from hell and for whatever reason was latched onto me. Thankfully I haven't seen it since, but I can't be certain that I'm not going to see it again. One of the weirdest stories that I've ever heard happened is not my own, but my father's. My father works as a forest service worker, and he had many weird encounters over his years. This one in particular gave me chills all throughout my childhood, and it made me constantly just question things. Now, I'll tell this exactly how my father's told me and how that he's wrote it down for me, so sit back and enjoy. I think it's truly bizarre. Now, to start out, everything's going pretty well in life. I'm happy and my wife is now pregnant. Now this is going to be our second child. We already had our other one who's about 1 now, and we're really excited to have a second. We had a boy and we were hoping for another girl. It turned out that we had another boy, but that was just as much joy into our lives. Those who haven't experienced parenthood don't understand how it changes your life sometimes, and how it changes your approach to taking risks. I know that I certainly had the same feeling too. Now where I was based at for my job, I didn't really encounter anything too heavy. I hadn't been working this role for that many years, and there was other more experienced guys out there. In fact, a lot of the time I'd actually get quite frustrated because I really truly wanted to do more, but I just wasn't able to. Sometimes there would be things that the other guys would know that I could do, and they would just rush off to do it before I had the chance to, and it was so frustrating. I enjoyed being out there, don't get me wrong, but I was kind of stuck doing more computer stuff and just, I guess, the boring things. Now, at this place, I knew that I could progress, but it was going to take years. They basically offered me all the training and everything, but my god, it was slow. The thing was, I was probably smarter than all of the people there, just not being given any opportunities that I needed to progress. It was almost like they'd given me this form, and it said everything I needed to do, but there were holes in it that they couldn't see, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I was quite tempted to join the Navy. I actually wanted to become a Navy SEAL at the time. It wasn't really possible because of some of the injuries I had, but I know that if I really pushed myself, I probably could have overcome them. But the problem was, even sometimes when I was doing this job, even just hiking around and doing my normal things, I would have a pain that I couldn't seem to stop from the bottom of my foot. I actually still have issues with it today. I'm not quite sure why it started, but yeah, it's just something I get on with. So on this particular day, it was just the same. There was more exciting call-outs and things to go and do, but literally before I could even get to the radio to say I would do it, someone would say I'm on it and would already be up there with their coffee in their hand, taking the last sips of their coffee before flying on out the door and to go and have all the fun. Yeah, it kind of really sucked doing this, but I guess it gave me more time to think and just relax a bit. The problem is, if you're like me, that time very quickly lends to boredom. I started going through some of the records and some of the reports. I basically had to reorganize them because some people in this office area, they would just throw everything onto a desk and not do anything. They would only look for items if they needed it, which of course is a very stupid idea and wastes everyone's time, but back in my day I guess that's how it was. So I start reading through some reports. There was a few pretty creepy things on there. Some people would say that they had a feeling, like an intense feeling of fear that they couldn't describe, accompanied by a knocking on some of the trees. They were never able to locate the source of this sound and they thought it was just animals, but it came up quite often over the years. Then I heard a really strange one. Apparently there was a ranger that worked here and a lot of the other people thought that he was going crazy. I was reading a second-hand account of what had happened to him. Apparently something had spoke to him and told him the future. Weirdly though, when I looked back through another account, which was more recent than that one, some of the things that he said actually come true. And the person making the report actually noted that and how weird it was. Upon further investigation, it turned out that this person thought that he had spoke to beings or something. I don't know, kind of like aliens? They didn't describe it very well, just very vaguely. Now it seems like many of these cases were dismissed. There were other weird things too, like a Pacific area where you'd feel very hot, completely unnaturally to the point that you'd actually question if there was some kind of hot spring there, or something weird that shouldn't have been there, but again they could never find the source of it. The thing that made this even more bizarre is that eventually the plants and trees and everything in the area would start to die, so you basically knew for certain that something was definitely off there. Now I decided that I had to get out and do the very minimum just to not be in the office, and that's what I did. I remembered setting out and I was being a little bit more paranoid than normal. I think all these stories were just playing in my head. I remembered I kept thinking that I saw something walking through the tree line above ahead of me, always maintaining the higher ground. It kind of just trailed alongside me. It's really hard to describe, but was truly creepy. Now I don't know what it was, but I think it was some kind of large animal there. Not big enough to be a bear, but certainly weird. I did think maybe it was a hiker out there, but it wasn't possible. I thought that was bizarre. I remember thinking to myself that you've just learnt the power of human potential in the mind, and it was pretty scary to me. Now, life goes on. We probably get to about a month or 6 weeks in, and again, they're just not training me properly. It's kind of really annoying because they'll complain at me for doing something when it's exactly how somebody's told me to do it. And they'll say, oh no, just do it confidently. But then they'll say, why did you do that? And you'll explain that's how you were trained, and they wouldn't seem to listen, and it was kind of like a hostile group. I didn't end up staying there for too long, but I'll get to that later. So what do? Once again, get reserved to balancing the books and just doing the normal work. Now this is actually at a time before we had computers, so it did make days very boring too. The problem I found is that some people just did not have good handwriting. I've never been the best at reading others' handwriting, but especially in these situations, my god, it was like some of these people had honestly made an effort to write as illegible as possible. And again, if you can't read it, they complain, so I kind of become an expert of reading these things eventually. And again, every so often there's weird reports. I realise too, quite often when it's recorded, people just think, oh, it's the other guy not paying attention. Maybe he wants everyone to look at him and stuff like that. At least that's on the report conclusion, but I had a feeling that something was off when I kept on seeing the reportings of some kind of beings out there. This spanned over a number of years too, and long before I was there. They all seemed to be described as relatively the same. They called them the forest walkers. Apparently they seemed to be quite tall, and they would walk in almost a weird limp motion. The weird thing is that they would be silent too, and if you approached them, weird things would happen. Some people said they felt almost like they were high. Others said that they would just know things they couldn't have otherwise and stuff like that. I don't know if I believe in the supernatural that much, or at least at the time I didn't, but I just considered that these were just things that happen when you've been out in the woods for too long by yourself. Now eventually as time increased, and I started complaining to the higher ups about the issues I was having, I started to get out more and do more interesting things. I even got to rescue a few people too, which is a really cool feeling. I don't know if you've ever experienced it before, but there's something so cool about knowing that you preserved human life. You stepped in and you made a big difference and impact for someone. It's not something I'd felt before in other jobs too, so I was quite happy. Now, as I go out for a patrol one evening, I remembered having a strange feeling that the air was different. There was almost some kind of metallic smell that I couldn't quite describe. I was concerned that I had some kind of illness or that I accidentally got something on my nose, but no matter how much I wipe my nose, I can't seem to get rid of the feeling. And there was almost some kind of static in the air. You know, like when you have static electric and just before you feel the buzz, it was kind of like that. Now that's when I feel something. I can tell something's looking at me and I stop to turn around and see what it is. And then I can make out some kind of figure. It's probably about 20 feet away. It's wearing kind of like a dark coloured robe, but when it gets closer it appears more white. It walks with a weird limp and I can't believe my eyes. I actually rub my eyes quickly, not sure for a second if I'm dreaming, and it's gone. Now I think this is pretty creepy. I want to figure out what this is, so filled with excitement I actually jogged towards where it was. Now I couldn't tell you too much else about it, but just that it completely vanished. I probably spent another hour myself actually searching the surrounding areas just to see if I could find something, anything there to explain what I'd just seen, but alas, I come up blank. There's nothing there but myself. Now I'm actually a little bit irritated because I don't want to seem stupid. I really don't want to become like one of the people whose stories I've read, probably to be dismissed later on the same way that I dismissed some of theirs. But currently, it seems like I'm going to have no option but for that to be the case for myself. Yeah, it sucked really. I go back eventually and tell them what happened. Now, no one believes me, which is what I expected, and they say, yeah, you're too junior to be going out there and investigating things like this. I was pretty fed up again. I come from a role before where I was very well respected, and honestly the way I was being treated was really annoying me. Now a few months go on, and it becomes winter, and the going gets a little bit more tough really. It was pretty cold out there. I mean, uncomfortably so for myself. Now, I remembered on one particular day, I can't tell you specifically what I was doing, I just remembered that I was out there, that I spotted something weird, I mean really bizarre. There were these small figures, kind of limping around in the woods, again silently. Now I can't believe what I'm seeing. They're probably about 5 feet tall now, and in more of a white coloured gown kind of thing. Like I said, I didn't know what this was. I thought maybe it was something from Halloween, like decorations people put out there. And I actually wasn't too scared now. I was convinced that this wasn't actually a real thing or threat or danger, so I decided to sit back and very slowly follow these things. Now I didn't look behind myself, so there could have been more, but these things just kept on marching on, kind of down the path for a good 10 minutes longer. Now they never once seemed to notice me or so much as turn around, so again, I'm still not entirely sure what I'm seeing, but I think it's some kind of Halloween decoration that someone's playing around with. I don't know, it could be a cult, it could be anything, but I'm not too worried. I don't know if it was the size of them or what, but I just wasn't concerned. Also, there seemed to be nature interacting normally around, so that meant that these things weren't a threat, at least I thought. So this continues on until eventually they all stop at something. I stopped too, and I can see about 4 of them. I was incredibly curious as to what they were looking at, but there's no real way for me to be able to see where I'm based currently. I get closer and closer and realise that I'm going to have to take the long way round now to figure out what it is. I decide to take a stealthy approach, and I try and walk very slowly through the foliage and get around. I do make it to a pretty good horizon, and I can see in front, and I still can't figure out what they're looking at. Now I'm sure these are people now, so I become a little bit more confident, and I walk down even closer to where they are. Eventually, I ended up crashing through some of the brush, and I decide that I'm going to be more present now. Obviously these people know that I'm here, so what's the point of trying to hide away from them? I go a little bit quicker now, and eventually go round to where I think that they're facing, and I can't see their actual faces. It's kind of just dark where their faces are completely covered up in something. Now, I crouch down to get a better look at them, and suddenly, I can hear voices in my head. They don't sound like voices I've ever heard before too, and it's almost like my own voice but different. And I keep hearing different things that haven't happened yet. I hear about the birth of my son and know that it's going to be a boy. I know exactly what he's going to look like, how my career's going to go, what my wife's going to do, and some of the hardships that come up and who's going to pass away in my family. It actually makes me incredibly emotional at this point, and I almost feel like it's too much and start to cry a bit. I ended up kind of just becoming overwhelmed with my emotions, and I fall back into the dirt and stare up at the sky. The sky's very bright today, and it actually looks quite nice. After a moment, I kind of stop hearing the voices so much. They kind of just slowly fade out, like somebody slowly turning down the volume on a record, and I get up. I realise now that whatever these things are has gone now, and I'm just here alone, very confused as to what's actually just happened to me. I get up, and I'm sure there's going to be an explanation for this. I ended up scouring around for probably another hour and a half until I conclude that nothing's here. That's when my panic finally catches up with me, and I decide that I need to get back as quick as possible. I start making my way there. I eventually get back to the station and immediately write down my report. I didn't speak to anybody else about what had happened, and that's when I'm confused. I suddenly realised that what I was reading was very similar to some of the reports of what had happened years before. The ones where that people had considered the guys that were reporting it a little bit crazy or seeing things. And for that reason, I actually took the report and ended up throwing it into the trash. I didn't want my colleagues to think I was crazy. I mean, I didn't like most of them to begin with. I knew that this was going to hurt me moving on to the other areas that I wanted to work, so there was going to be no benefit of me actually posting this. I ended up moving on and working as a ranger in different areas and doing different kinds of roles too, even being a fire service worker. Now here's the weird thing. I only realised it much later, but I did have a son, and he looked exactly like I knew he would. The job that I changed into is exactly what I heard I would. My wife's role too. Also, some family members that died, they were the exact people who I was told would do so as well. Now suddenly I felt kind of a weird fear come over me, almost like a wash and flood of emotions coming back, realising that something had contacted me back then, and for whatever reason wanted me to know what was going to happen. I can't put my finger on why this happened or how it happened to me. I just know what I saw was real, and that I wasn't the only person that saw those kinds of things out there. Lots of my other colleagues had experienced some very similar things, and I just don't know what to make of it all. Now I've been camping in this one spot in the middle of a national park in NC in the wilderness for years. Here are my stories. So in September 2017, a friend and I went camping here for a long weekend, and we've participated in a local paddling festival. He ended up being almost 10 hours late, so I wandered around in the wilderness for a while. In retrospect, this feels crazy. I found a giant, and when I say giant, I mean industrial sized refrigerator about 10 yards in the woods from where I set up camp. Fast forward to when my friends joined me. So the 8 strangers who set up camp about 15 yards north of us, which isn't a big deal. When it's Monday morning though and we have to part ways, we notice that the fridge is gone. We checked the river and that was just west of our sight and it hadn't fallen in. We thought that maybe the campers north of us had taken it, but the thing was at least the size of a smart car and inches sunken into the ground. I've gone back since and I'm still haunted by the whole incident. Now in February 2018, a friend of mine and I went camping during the week of our college having a break. She'd never been camping before and I felt somewhat scared connecting that site to what I felt like was a no. Better introduce her to a camping place that's better though than drag her into the backcountry of the NC Mountains in winter. So we set up camp and went for a somewhat local hike, and we were hiking northbound. A younger attractive couple passed us going southbound. Now we remember their faces well, or my friend does, and this becomes important later on, which is good since I have difficulties with facial recognition. We get some dry firewood from the closest Walmart since it's been snowing all day, and when we return it's pitch black outside. On the dirt to the site, maybe a mile out, we pass a car facing us. On the side of the road, it's actually parked up with its hazards on and honked randomly. I attempt to see if any of the owners need some help, but we're 2 young college women in the woods by ourselves and we don't want to tempt fate. As I slowed, we saw the 2 people jump in the river with their flashlights. Now, my friend swears that they were the couple from the hike. A couple nights later, we stood around our measly fire, dampened by the continual snowfall, when I suddenly but surely lose all sense of direction. Even though I'm looking at the fire listening to my friend talk, I cannot tell if I'm facing the road, the car, her, the tent or the river. And this feeling lasts for a couple of minutes and I don't remember her saying anything else at the time. Once I calm down a bit and move towards the other side of the fire, I feel somebody behind me and I hear the jiggle of what sounds like keys. My keys are in the tent and there were no other campers for miles, at least that I was aware of. I was just paralyzed with fear and kept feeling this dark, heavy kind of presence creeping up on me. It felt like it's right on my heels about to grab me, and I punch up behind me but feel nothing. We ended up leaving the campsite the next day due to snow. Okay, now, my dad told me a story recently that I've really been wanting to share on here. This is from back when I was a kid in Mexico. When my dad was a kid, he and my grandpa went to my grandpa's land to prepare the soil for planting crops. Bored, my dad wandered off to a nearby stream where he saw a bunch of human-like dolls playing around in the water. He said they looked like they're adults, only smaller, with proportions like dolls. Not exactly sure what that means. They splash around in the water and at times, it looks as though they're walking on it. They signal at him to come and play with them, and my dad actually runs over to this excitedly. He said he played with them for a while when my grandpa noticed that he had wandered off and went to find him. When my grandpa found my dad seemingly playing alone by the stream, getting all wet, he got super mad and dragged him away. Apparently, my grandpa and grandma were never able to see what exactly was waving goodbye to my dad. After that, my dad started seeing this geonids around the house. They'd pop out from behind walls during dinner, and my dad would try to feed them scraps of food, much to my grandma's annoyance. Eventually they get worried and go to a local curandera. She had a little ritual and told him to keep a cigarette behind his ear for a week, and then they were gone. So it turned out that the grandparents were also able to see them a bit. My dad swears that it's all true though. Nobody ever really believes him, and he's embarrassed by the story. The only reason that he told me is because my mum teases him about it and forces it out of him. This story occurred from when I was in high school around 2010-ish. My parents' house backed up to a small wooded area. It's not a forest by any means. There were walking trails and other neighbourhoods around it, but the woods were big enough that we used to see deer and the occasional fox. There was also a small creek that ran through it. I used to spend time in the fall/winter poking around there, but it obviously wasn't obscured by brush then. I found what I assumed was likely a deer path that ran all the way up to my old elementary school, which was about a block away via roads, but using the deer trails took about 10 or 15 minutes. I was back in this fairly often, which meant the following story was weird. I went down to the creek one day and followed the trail like normal, but this time I found a partial deer skeleton at the end. The head and legs were missing. The rest was still there, but there was no blood, and that was strange. They were stripped completely clean, even the bones, and they're bright white. At the time, there weren't any coyotes in the area like there are now, and I've never seen a bobcat there. To this day, I have no idea how the skeleton actually got there, or what happened to it. It was too clean to be a predator kill, and that doesn't explain why the front half of it was missing. I got so freaked out that I actually never went back to those woods again. Now, a couple of years back, myself and my mother were visiting her sister in the north of the country, a few hundred miles from where we lived. My mum had decided to drive rather than take the train, and after staying the weekend, we started our return trip. We left on a Monday morning, but as the distance to our town was so great, we called in with my mother's friend with the intention of spending the night. It was a really nice house, but it's literally in the middle of nowhere, at least a mile from the next nearest house and miles again from the nearest town or shop. As we get close to the house, a huge summer storm hit, torrential rain, thunder and lightning. It turned out to be quite lucky. We had planned to stay overnight at that place because the driving conditions were so dangerous. The house was undergoing a massive interior renovation at the time, which meant that my mum and me would be spending the night crashing in the living room as all the spare bedrooms were out of commission. Once the workmen had left for the day, we spent most of the day and that of the evening on the back porch watching the storm before we turned in for the night. I crashed on the couch while my mum took a leather divan style sofa that was placed directly under the window that faced away to the driveway. Late into the night, I woke up feeling very uneasy, as if I'm being watched. I opened my eyes but didn't move anything other than my head towards where my mum was sleeping. There was a hooded black figure standing at the window over my mum, with his hands up to the window trying to see if anybody was there or anything like that. Now I should mention that the driveway had a very powerful light fixed on a pole at the edge of the front yard. My mum, exhausted from driving, was completely out of the count despite the window being no more than 18 inches from her face. The figure continued to slowly scan the room, then stopped, suddenly, as if he'd just seen me. The yard was positioned so that no light was cast into the house, so the room was completely pitch black. By now, the severity of the storm had increased and thunder and lightning was striking frequently. As though on cue, a lightning strike hit what seemed to illuminate the whole room. Now the figure actually moved from his vantage point and started walking towards the right-hand side of the house, where there is another window offering a better room and a better view of everything. Without saying anything, I waited until the figure's out of sight and I slid off the couch, scuttling into the doorway just off the living room and out of the second window's line of sight. I peek from behind the wall and can see a figure at the window. By this time, I was freaked and unsure exactly what to do. Lightning hit once again, and the figure snapped his head right to where I was hiding. I remembered being almost frozen, feeling his eyes which were locked onto me. He left the second window and headed back towards the first. I somehow managed to move, running the stairway in the corner room that led up to the bedroom of my mother's friends. I burst in shouting that there's a man there outside looking in. Once over the initial surprise of everything and waking them up in such a panic, my father, a large man in his own right, jumped up, summoning his eldest son who's a few years older than me, found some cricket bats and marches down the stairs. The rest of the family and myself followed warily. My mum, having been woken up, who was somewhat drowsy by the commotion, met us at the bottom of the stairs, having just passed in the hallway by her best friend's half-naked husband, toting a cricket bat and marching out into the storm. I explained what happened, but could tell my mum was in equal parts skeptical, as she was also shocked. We waited for what felt like an eternity in the darkness, as no one thought or perhaps dared to turn on a light. Mum's friend tried to reassure us that it's just a late-night traveller who had broken down or got lost. Her husband and son returned after a minute or two. The husband went as far as to get changed and check the ground before he hopped in his car and drove down the road a couple of miles in both directions. There was nothing else though. There had been no sound of a car leaving or the driveway or any physical evidence of anybody being outside. This basically did little to reassure me, and I was unable to shake the feeling of being watched, the same feeling that had originally awoken me. We managed a fitful night before we gathered our things and set out the following day. My mum was convinced though that I'd imagined the whole thing and told her friend's son by the way of apology. This annoyed me at first, although I knew it was the most logical explanation for them, as no one else had actually seen the figure. Looking to forget the whole experience, I did not argue this matter. As my mother said her goodbyes, I went and snapped a picture at the house before returning to find her waiting by the car and ready to go. I quickly popped my head in the house to say my own goodbyes and apologise for waking them from last night. Eventually the car horn kept sounding, with 2 long continuous beeps, and a third and final one which was a bit shorter. I then went outside the house to where the car was parked and it hadn't moved, and sat with all the doors closed apart from the passenger door to the driver's side, which is open. As I get in the car, I see my mum slumped in the wheel. Frantically, I pulled open the door, trying to shake her awake. I found the pulse on her neck, which seems to be strong, but it seems to be unconscious. I pulled her out of the car and shouted to help. As I dragged her into the house, I sat her on the couch, and it's the same one that I slept on the night before, and with the help of her friend, managed to bring her around from what I assume is a fainting spell. Thankfully, she revived quickly, and within an hour was ready to hit the road. Her friends were more than happy to let us stay for the day, and we were quite against her driving anyway. After what had happened, though, she was keen to get home, and I was not keen to spend another night there, although I was still feeling guilt as I wasn't too brave to really talk her out of driving. She didn't remember passing out or even getting into the car. Now, about a year ago, my girlfriend and I were on a trail at Lemonil Lake in northern Nevada. It's about 1.5 miles each way, I believe. Usually pretty well populated. It was that day as well. There were at least a handful of people on the trail here and there, plenty down at the trailhead and parking lot. It was otherwise a totally normal sunny day. Evening come quite quickly and we started heading back down, not wanting to be out when it got dark, as there was no cell service up here for quite a distance, and it was just an afternoon hike. We started down the trail and I got to the slightest hint of a bad feeling, like we definitely needed to get back to our car before it got dark. I think that's generally just common sense and doesn't need to be prompted by a sixth sense or anything. Still, I keep an eye out as we went. Weirdly, absolutely nothing happened until we're maybe 300 yards away from the parking lot. The trees had largely been left behind as we descended in elevation, and bushes, large and small, were instead there. There was a creek that ran through to our right. Ahead of us, maybe 50 yards away, was a lone woman and her medium-sized dog on a leash. Now, I've got my head on swivel the whole day because I was just trying to keep an eye out and make sure that the hint of bad feeling didn't amount to anything which I was carrying. The woman ahead of us was up about the same distance for a while down the trail, and I felt somewhat reasonably safe with her there. If anything was strange to happen, it would probably be mountain lions, which are known to live up there. Now, as we were walking, me and my girlfriend both heard what sounded like a big boulder sliding and grafting along a stone surface. It lasted like a few seconds, and we were both looking at the stone surface about 600 meters to our left. Now, fully expecting basically a landslide, but there was nothing, and daylight was good enough to see if anything was coming from there, and there definitely wasn't anything. I immediately looked to the lady ahead of us, and just a second later, she and her dog started booking it. Right as they did, a herd of deer came sprinting out of the bushes, away from the boulder. Now, they ran across the creek and kept going to our right. After now pausing for a second to discuss that weird noise and what it could have been, I then drew my gun. We passed the same little section where the lady was when she took off, and thankfully nothing happened. I didn't really hear or see anything in those bushes, though I'm not surprised. A whole herd of deer was in there and we couldn't see them until they literally ran out, despite being at greater elevation at this time. We quickly made it back to the parking lot and I put my gun back in its holster. It felt safe getting to the pavement for some reason. We caught up with the woman and dog. She started to catch her breath and was panicking a little. We asked if she heard the weird sound and she said she heard the loud bouldery sound, and then off to her left close by, she distinctly heard a big low growl, and then she heard the deer coming. The deer would have probably ran right into her if she didn't move. Watching this happen from afar above was just weird. We've determined that it could have been a mountain lion, but I've still got two questions. Why did I get the feeling that we needed to leave ever so abruptly? I mean, an hour before anything happened. And why/how was it able to make the big sound of boulders moving? And then the woman heard a growl. But why was it not by us? I think this indicates that there was definitely something in those bushes. However, I'm very confused about the bigger sound. I doubt the same animal had made a huge boulder scraping sound, so there was probably two of them, but I never really got to figure out what this could have been. Last summer, a good friend and I embarked on a backpacking trip through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. As fairly experienced day hikers, we felt comfortable in the Whites for our inaugural overnight trip. While planning, my buddy Ellis figured that we could hike to a country and make our way into the first wilderness night, which is more fun. I wasn't going to disagree. Beautiful views, historic trails, and protected night in the dry weather wilderness. I was stoked, to say the very least. Now, before any hiking trip, I do a little internet search on the trails or shelters that I'll be crossing. Throughout the mid to late 1900s, there were a series of these lean-to ups and downs on the dry river, which are meant for backpackers or through hikers really looking to escape the crowds in more popular areas of the forest. Though as time went on, the Forest Service had more and more pressing matters to deal with. Therefore, many of these shelters were actually dismantled, except for Dry River Shelter number 3, the last remaining shelter in the wilderness zone. On the morning of our hike, I met my friend at the trailhead and we set off. The sky was overcast, bringing with it a dense fog through the forest. The weather left us with nearly no visibility. There were stunning views, and at least the trail consisted of a prime, technical New England rock scrambling alongside the river. Now my friend and I made it up the Presidential Ridge, stopping by the Lake of Clouds. The hut was filled with day hikers, backpackers and thru hikers all socializing together. We were even rewarded with some more sun, and a brief glimpse of the drive of a valley on the summit of Mount Monroe. Before the fog rolled back in, we see that there's dwindling views and stiff wind, so we decide to hustle below the tree line, down to the dry river shelter free. This will be our home for the night. Once we dropped off the ridge into the valley, we entered the wilderness zone, where rangers patrolled sparingly. Time to really be alone, I thought. As we trekked into the wilderness, all signs of civilization disappeared, and the trail was densely overgrown. Although it's been raining all week, there were no footprints in the mud either. At least we would have some relaxing isolation together, I figure. After about an hour or so of descending, my friend spotted the lean-to just as our legs were asking for relief. A gorgeous old timber structure with a well-used fire pit alongside a cold mountain river. I mean, this is well and truly pristine camping. As we settled in and explored the site, I found a small bound notebook nestled into the corner of the structure. On the cover somebody wrote, "Dry River Shelter Free." Out of curiosity, however, I opened it, but found nothing more than a lone man's name scribbled onto the first page and a date. Now, just your standard camping log. Oddly though, the man had signed the book the prior day, but we see no evidence or signs of humans or even animals or disturbance upon the trail here at the shelter. The rain can actually wash away tracks, but not all signs of animal life. Something felt off to me. I showed it to Ellis, who found it curious, but nothing more than the single name. He convinced me that the man was probably a hiking veteran and professional LNT. I brought this into my friend's thoughts though, and the situation eases my mind now. As the sun set, we started a roaring fire alongside the riverbank. My friend commented on how quiet the location is, having not seen another soul beyond the chirp of birds since leaving the Crawford path. The silence was eerie, but we figured that the city life desensitized us to the wild. The sun was setting and we grew tired and into the darkness. My friend took the lean-to and I spent the night in my tent. Sleep comes quickly after hiking 8+ miles with the 20 pounds on my back, but this didn't last too long. A brutally sharp slapping noise woke me. The only thing I could compare the noise to would be somebody swinging a 2x4 into a tree and a snapping thick branch. I figured it was a bear coming for our food bag, hanging in the tree, maybe 10 to 50 yards away. Nothing out of the ordinary for New Hampshire. Sleep overtook me once again, and I remembered waking up to the sun rising over the peaks. I stumbled out of my tent to see my friend also waking up slowly. As we made our morning oats and coffee, I wandered around the site again to see if I could find the marks that the bear had left. Instead, I noticed something strange. The small notebook was open. I swear that I put it back where I found it. I closed it and put it to the corner of the shelter, not on the floor. I say, "Hey, were you checking out the camp log last night?" "No, I passed out, man." "It's not like there was anything in there to read anyway," he responded. "Are you sure?" I commented as I bent over to pick it up. The lone hiker was not so lonely anymore. At least 20 more filled the pages. The lone traveller, whose name was originally on the first page, could now be found several pages deep into the notebook. I tossed it to my friend, whose face instantly dropped the second that his mind registered what page is on. Great. Now I know that it wasn't just delusionalness from dehydration. Wow, we must have seen things last night. There's no way that we missed all those names. How could we? Both of us. This is when I began to tell my friend about the slapping noise the night before. I received nothing other than instant denial. These sounds were not the result of some hooligans or backward crazies harassing us. Rather sternly, my friend says, "It's a bear, Jack. It's a bear, Jack. Let's go now." And we did go. My friend led us out of there. Now, a year has passed since, and I'm not quite sure what happened that night, on that dry river shelter number 3, that lonely day. The memory of seeing the note so clearly laid out was so crisp in my mind, I could not have mistaken it. Could I have mistaken the noises I heard before and the new additions? I don't think so, especially not having my friend there too. So what was it? What happened to us that night? Now the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a Forest Server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there, and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now, I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night. You'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now, I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened. We just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie, especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night, and I walked towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you've hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's fallen quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleet, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd, and I tell myself just to relax a bit and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here, and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose, it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time, I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often, I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice one or two strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier, and I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't come here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around, so that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face, and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's going to hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but it almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods. And I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, And I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso and very long skinny arms that dragged the floor. But I don't know where they gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared and it was extremely close to me. For whatever reason it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here, and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now it reminds me of a story of what one of my other fire ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw. in terms of how he described it. The way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now, I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist. And again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again, I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again, I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now, I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle, and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again, and I can't see anything. For a second, I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of 2 eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where the light is, and it's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me why wasn't I more scared of that weird thing I'd seen, and to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something, and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remember they were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refuse to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it, just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same, and you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realised that this definitely isn't the moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit, not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seem to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood, or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light, but again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist's watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working, I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did, and this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now the closer I get, there's something else I noticed which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's an eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it was a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now, some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is, and I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I'd see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my lights on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there. But again, I just presumed it was people. And I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long, and they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later, I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly, and I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour. But I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but in those moments it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced that I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though, and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me, but again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery's virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery's low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone, I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace, and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now, momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends, and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything. And I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest, and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me. The area that I grew up in is the one where I work now. It's always cold where I live. It feels like it's constantly dark and gloomy. I mean, honestly, I don't ever think we really come out of winter. It had some perks though. Visibility could be good sometimes. That's if it wasn't too foggy. Especially in the winter time, I kind of like the yellowy glow on the floor from the different leaves that would go down there. The only problem was you were constantly damp, and that could be quite frustrating at times. I work as one of the forest rangers. I'd done it for a little while, and I didn't think there was much a job could throw at me. I'd worked other jobs before, like mining specifically, which I found really difficult. I found it easy to lose your mind down there, going hours and hours without getting any daylight. It's just not good for you. Now, one thing I did notice though when I started this line of work is just how quiet it is. Sometimes it could be a good thing to be out there alone, but sometimes it really wasn't. That was probably the hardest thing to me to get adjusted to, and also how dark the forests are. I mean, even in daytime, where it was always raining, you couldn't always see as far as you'd like to, but the trees were lifeless, mostly, or at least in the winter. You'd even see some dead ones thrown about on the ground, which the storm had kicked up. There was all different kinds of rumours about what had happened out here. There was something that I realised while I was surveying though. I heard a gunshot. Now, this was one single gunshot, but it sounded like a rifle. The thing is, I only connected the dots after it had happened, but I felt something just brush past me. I didn't hear a sound, but there was a click in a tree, then the gunshot sound. Then it became apparent someone was shooting shots near me. I screamed out, hey, what on earth are you doing? And started swearing, thinking it was a hunter. I screamed, you could have killed me. And I then ducked down for a second, trying to figure out where they are. I'm trying my best to do some kind of scouting, but I don't really know what I'm doing. I think because of the direction that I believe the bullets come from, that I'm in good cover here and I shouldn't be seen. The problem is, I've got to get moving to safer grounds now. I look around and I really can't hear anything, and I actually wonder if it was something else. Maybe it was something explosive. Maybe somebody was trying to take the trees down illegally and it was a bit of shrapnel that come off. Seems like it was a good thing if that was the case, because at least nobody was trying to kill me or hunting and just doesn't know how to aim their gun. So I ended up walking normally after this realization. I'm now walking towards an area which has some good lighting, so I know that I'm going to be relatively safe if I follow this path. But I couldn't shake the feeling that that was definitely strange. Anyway, I've still got a few more checks to do. To be honest, this is actually the easiest part of the job, where that I well and truly don't actually have to do much. I mean, literally, I'm just walking around. The pay was alright, but it wasn't the best, and it was actually quite frustrating, to be honest. I mean, the job wasn't too difficult, but I just felt tired every day. It's honestly like I come home from work and I just have to lay there for a while just to recover. I think it's from being on my feet so often out there, and I think being cold often takes its toll on you in other ways. I'd send out so many job applications, but because I didn't have a high education, I had a really hard time getting opportunities, which really wasn't the best. I mean, come on. I knew how good I was, and I knew the jobs before that had been quite challenging, so I definitely had skills there, but nobody seemed to be giving me an opportunity for anything. But what could I do about it? I just had to keep going with it all, I guess, but it definitely wasn't a nice feeling. It meant too that I had another night job where I would wait tables at a restaurant in a small cafe. I didn't have an issue with it, but I kind of felt a little bit degrading. At least when I was at this job walking around, I could just reflect on things, and I kind of felt like I had a higher purpose. But beggars can't be choosers, and that was what I was doing. This was often on my mind out there, to be honest. I think where we rarely spoke to people on the job, I mean, you would just have all day to just get in your head and just think and think and think and think. I resorted to singing eventually, and I started doing it again now. You know, the crazy part is I didn't always realise that I was. I would basically catch myself singing songs. I'd kind of make them up as well, because I didn't know most of the lyrics honestly, other than the main chorus. There was one other guy that I worked with, but I mean literally just the one. So we'd very rarely encounter each other out here. In fact, it was designed not to happen, because obviously if we're both bumping into each other, then we're not really patrolling correctly, but that was fine. I like to follow the train tracks sometimes. I'm not quite sure why, to be honest. I mean, the trains would come here, but so rarely. At first it looked pretty cool to see their glowing light in the night, but it also become kind of a common thing, almost like a very quiet part of the scenery, only loud when it's directly in front of you. I used to love staring down the train tracks and just looking out into what I thought was the abyss, just imagining a better future for myself. The good thing is, there's been no more shots at this point, so it's safe to presume that it was something alright, but nothing too dangerous. I decide that I'm going to report it when I get back, but now I have more surveying to do. So off I go. I keep doing my surveying, and everything's basically normal, and I then find myself finishing this job, and I have to hustle over to my other one, which I didn't want to do that much. But at least I'm going to be in the warm with this job. So I get in there, and it's a real quiet night. There's basically one lone cop sitting at another table, drinking coffee by himself, just kind of staring at it and looking. I'm not sure exactly what he's doing. He's basically just sat there kind of staring around. He was in the corner, so I guess that he did this intentionally so he could see if anybody else was around or up to trouble, but I thought, come on man, we're in the quietest part of town, there's nothing going on. I go to ask if he wants anything else, but he doesn't say anything. He just kind of looked at me. That's odd, I thought, as I decide that I'm just going to stick to myself. Usually I like to make conversation with people in here, not just for the sake of being nice, but just to have something to do. I mean, really, my god, I would get bored out here sometimes. But he doesn't say nothing to me. He just kind of keeps an eye on me. I then realise he's kind of looking through me, and he hasn't drank his coffee. I come over and offer to refill it, sticking my hand out so he knows that I'm ready to take the cup for him, but he doesn't say anything. I then sit down next to him and say, "What's wrong? You need to talk?" He then finally breaks his stare and looks up and says, "You don't want to know, buddy." I say, "What's wrong?" Again, he doesn't say too much of anything, and I just go about doing my other duties. I'm having a good clean up and stuff, and I eventually go back to him. Not quite sure why, I just felt like he had something he needed to tell someone. I mean, just anyone. So I sit down next to him and refill his cup, making it hot, and then I pour one for myself. I say, "What happened?" He says, "There's someone out here and it's just crazy. The whole case is blowing my mind." I decided it's best not to ask questions because obviously he's not going to be able to say everything, but he just keeps on shaking his head at me. I say, "Come on, you'll be fine. Just put out some flyers and the whole town will be after him. What happened?" He then says that, "Well, we think there's a killer out there. People are dropping dead every so often and we just can't figure out why it's happening. This has been going on for years out here, but the last one was crazy. It was so brutal, it kind of made me not want to do this anymore." I just nodded and didn't do anything else. I knew that he probably just needed somebody to hear. Those guys have a really tough job, of which I have the absolute utmost respect for. So now anyway, I just pack up everything and tell him that we're closing soon, and he says thank you and tips me and leaves. As I'm watching that cop car pull away, I can't help but think to myself that there's definitely something up. I've never seen a cop so shaken up before, and it kinda scared me. It makes me think of the shot that happened earlier, but I think, you know what, there's no way that guy was hunting me. There's no way anybody's out there, it's just me going crazy. Who was it? Was it even a guy? I don't know. I don't really care too much. So I go back to bed that night and I'm really struggling to fall asleep. I have this problem quite often, to be honest, where that I kind of just lay there and it's like I feel tired at all the wrong times and I could sleep when I've just woken up, but not at night. My bed becomes by far the most comfortable thing in this whole world when I need to get up and do things. But when it's time to lay there and do nothing, it seems like I cannot break out of it. I'm really not sure why. But anyway, this is happening and every so often I hear a tappy type sound. Kind of sounds metallic, but kind of not. It was creepy, man, I'm telling you. I turned down the TV and I could kind of hear it in the background a little bit. Though it seems to pick up static more like a radio. I'm stood there in my kitchen trying to figure out what's happening and I decide to quickly grab a weapon. I go to grab a knife but accidentally pick up a fork. It kind of broke my concentration as I smile to myself, then grab a knife. I go around room from room turning on all of the lights, convinced that I'm going to find someone there, but there's nothing. I actually scared the life out of myself with my own reflection, and I kind of stabbed out at nothing. My hand's trembling a bit and I tell myself to calm down. I'm pretty sure that if anybody is in here, whoever it is, I'm going to react quickest and end up hurting someone that might just be, I don't know, God knows. I could even be hurting myself and that's not a good idea. So I finish my patrol and end up upstairs and I have a quick look into the backyard. There's been some animals coming through and I think, well, you know what, it's probably just one of them. I shouldn't have to worry too much. I've just got to be brave now. So anyway, I decided to leave the TV on this time just to make it sound like I'm in another room in case anybody else is there. I put the knife down very carefully, placing it away from myself as I return back to my bed. Good night, world, I say to myself, and I kind of blacked out. I think maybe because of the emotions of it and the fear and my heart racing, it meant that my body needed a little bit of time to just knock itself out to recover. I think that happens often with myself. So I wake up anyway, making my morning coffee, and I feel pretty good about everything. Maybe it was a good sleep, but something really kickstarts me to be in a good mood, and I just can't stop smiling. So I grab my paper and everything, and I head to my car. I reach around for the keys, and I notice something strange. There's something etched on the side of my car, of which I can't figure out exactly what it is. I then go for a closer look, and I can see my name wrote in something. I don't know what it is. It was dark and sticky, but I think, come on, the kids, what's wrong with them? I know we live in a boring place, but you've got to have better things to do than this. I mean, what kind of childhood have they got? Gosh. As I go to wipe it off, but decide not to because I don't want to ruin my clothes and I don't have any kind of handkerchief or tissue on me. So now instead, I just jump in the car and start driving to work. The drive's pretty good, but my mood was dampened a little bit from my bright and sunny one at the time that I'd woken up, and I can see some of the mountainy type hill things as the rocks come into view as I get closer to the parking area. And I'm the only car there. As expected, nobody comes here at this time of year. I'm in for yet another boring shift. So off I go, out into my job that I loved so much, but couldn't wait to leave in some ways. One of these days I'm going to get a job that I actually deserve, and I can't wait for it to come, I think to myself. I decide to walk near the stream now, and just take a while to watch the rain fall. These beautiful droplets bouncing on the water look so pretty. It's something that doesn't actually leave my mind for a while. I think, you know what, it's not all that bad here, and my optimism seems to be coming back to me. I guess my mood was coming and going in waves now, so I didn't judge it too much. So I start doing my rounds, yes, the lovely morning rounds that I dread so much, where I know everything's going to be exactly the same as the day before. So I'm walking along with my umbrella, and I'm basically pushing some of the low-hanging branches out of the way. I can't be bothered to move or duck down under them, when I suddenly hear something. It sounds like sprinting. It sounds like it's really close to me, and I turn around quickly to see who it is. I jump behind myself, and no one's there. Now that was creepy. It literally sounded like somebody sprinting past me. I don't know what it could have been. I then turn to my left and I can see somebody running, clearly injured, up ahead of me. It must be another person. I then hear one of the most nasty screams I've heard before. It sounded like an animal about to die, it really did. I see them run off for a while until they duck down, and bang, I hear it. Another shot. I immediately drop to the ground. I don't know why, I honestly become like a military commando as I take cover and shelter. I decide to bury myself a little bit on some of the foliage under me as I stay still and quiet. Who was that? What on earth is happening? I'm inquisitive, naturally, but I know the best thing to do now is just to not move. So I lay there as still as I possibly can, trying to make sense of this and what's going on surrounding me. Now, I look up slowly, and I can hear more screaming, which immediately makes me duck down again. Have you ever been hiding somewhere and you can hear a door open? I mean, even if you're just playing like hide and seek or something. Well, it was just like that fear. Oh no, they found me. And I immediately ducked down, burying my face a bit. It probably was quite hard to see me, but I wasn't so sure, so I decided to stay as still as I possibly can, like a tortoise or something. And then, bang, silence. The echoes of the round off of the rocks are really not nice. It's burned into my brain. It's like something that will not stop playing. My ears are actually ringing a little bit. I'm not sure how close whoever that is, but they must be incredibly close to me. What on earth is happening? I start shaking and really struggle to stay calm. Now I'm waiting to hear a follow-up, but nothing happens. God, I'm gonna be next, I think. Well, I stay down for 5 minutes and nothing happens. I can hear someone moving around now, and it's really putting me off being there. Every so often, I can hear something encroaching in the leaves around me. It gets closer and closer, then eventually drifts off further and further, leaving me in a state of paralysis, unable to move, watching a nightmare unfold in front of me. Now, after a while, I realise that not much is happening, but I just can't move. I'm absolutely frozen to the spot. Somebody must have died right in front of me. That cop, he wasn't lying. I don't want to be that guy's next story in a calf, so I just wait there for longer. After a little while, I have to raise my head up because of being cold, and I kind of wiggle around a little bit very slowly. I realise that, God, it's got dark. Really dark, really quick. I had my eyes sealed shut so strong that it actually made my eyes hurt when I regained my focus. It actually took me a while to focus on my surroundings. I must have done something to my eyes. I slowly lift my head up and peek around, and I can't see anything or anyone. It's just really dark out here and I'm very cold. I know now that if I don't get moving, hypothermia might get me, so I have to move. So I slowly get up, crouching. I'm adopting kind of like a crab walk or something as I slowly make my way up and scan around. I can't see anything. I'm expecting to see movement or something out here in the wilderness with me. A body? Multiple bodies. Witnesses, who knows, just anything. But nothing. So I then get up and start making my way in the straightest beeline which I can possibly make to the relative safety of where the lights are. But I don't know who's out here. I don't know if I'm going the right way truly, because I've not been out here like this before. I honestly felt like this can't be real. I just keep saying in my head over and over again that this cannot be real, this cannot be real. I just can't stop saying it, almost like a mantra. So I get further and further away. Eventually I pass the same stream that I'd gone along earlier, and I know that I'm not too far from getting back. I eventually make it back to the parking lot, and nobody's there. My car's there, but not much else. I'm really shaken, and I quickly get into my car. I don't even care that I've left our place completely open, and the keys are in my pocket. I just know I'm getting out of there. I start up the car, and really drive quickly. I actually kind of got stuck for a second, but I was probably in such a panic that I didn't realise I could just put it into drive and I'd get out of there. After about a minute I do so. I drive a bit crazily, kind of swerving, but eventually my nerves settle enough that I'm able to drive over to the local police station. Now the crazy thing is, I get there, it's the same cop that I saw the other day in the cafe. He takes one look at me and says, "Come in." He looks like he's very tired, like he hasn't slept for a while. He then says, "Can you show me where it was?" After I spoke to him, describing what happened. I agree, and there's two other cops that come with me. I'm riding in the back of their car, too shaken to drive now, and I thought, you know what, is this even safe? Are three of us going to be safe out there? I start telling them this and my worries. They say, "Don't worry, we're armed." I say, "But no, you gotta be kidding me, you don't know how many are actually there." They then offer for me to stay in the car while they go out to investigate, and I say, "Yeah, that's fine." I don't know why I felt so safe in the back of that. Anybody with a gun could have just come and taken me, but I wasn't really thinking too much. I sit there and I realise just how dark it is, and it was still a bit cold in the car. They've left one of their doors slightly open, like not all the way, but you know when the lock hasn't engaged fully. But I just don't want to go out there and open it. I was really that scared. I keep going over the whole situation in my mind over and over again, thinking, gosh, what has happened? What on earth just happened? Why did this have to happen to me? And I start thinking, this is why I need to change jobs. This is why I need to get out of here. But eventually, the darkness somehow settled me a bit, and I wait. I actually fell asleep for a while, until a knock on the window wakes me up again. He says, "Yeah, you're right, we got him." I say, "Wow, where is he? What happened?" He says, No, look." I then come out of the car and they say, "Right over there, we found a decomposing body." I say, "What do you mean?" Apparently, just exactly where I heard the shot, there was a body which was probably 2 or so weeks old, maybe even more, out there. I say it's not possible, I heard it happen today. Are you sure there's not more? They say we're pretty certain, but we're gonna get forensics off this. We're gonna find the guy doing this. They then thank me for all of the information on this, and they say just to leave it with them. They drove me back to my home, and I remember when I got back, I just couldn't take it. I've still got my car with me because that's what they drove me back in, and I drove for probably another 7 hours until I eventually reached my brother's home. I get there and tell him everything that happened in a state of deliriousness, fatigue, and just emotional exhaustion overall. He says that I can stay with him for however long that I need, and I did for a good while. It turned out that it became a cold case and they never actually solved it, but I ended up having to relocate everything. I just couldn't handle it. It was too horrifying. I still don't know what happened to this day. Turns out that was the only body they found there too. I don't know what I walked into, but I still have the nightmares about it and wake up screaming. So this happened about 7 years ago. I was around 19 to 20 at the time and a scout leader. We had a camp in the forest. The nearest city was about 10 to 15 minutes away by car. Every year in July, we would have an international scout camp. Scouts from different countries would come to join us. I was in the preparations team, and we would go around every 2 or 3 weeks in advance to basically clean up and just get everything ready. The preparation team had about 20 people, about 10 to 12 as men, and the rest are women who are all in our late teens or early 20s. So if anybody's been a scout, they might know that the first thing in camp is setting up a flag. The flag is important in the camping game. Other scouts were constantly trying to steal the flag. If they managed to steal the flag, the lost team would have to go home. This actually never happened. No one was ever sent home. It was just a role to keep other members involved and wanting to protect the flag. Therefore, we had to constantly keep guard on it, or at least be by it. Other games involved other teams kidnapping members. All fun and games, nothing violent or harsh. It was meant to be fun but keep us alert all the time. So this is where the story begins. One night our preparation team was done with everything. The other 2 countries from Europe, about 60 people, were set to arrive in the morning. We had nothing to do, so we set up a campfire and started talking and singing. We had our guards, people from the team, set up in different locations, 2 near the flag and 2 near the entrance and 2 in the woods facing the river. So we tried and decided not to go to sleep initially. But then we decided to change the guards every 2 hours. Every guard has a whistle. If an animal or person was close to the camp, they would blow the whistle as an alarm to the danger. That night, I was an hour into sleep when I heard the whistle. We all woke up and ran to the team member who had whistled. She claimed that she saw 3 white figures running fast in the forest near the setup tents. We thought that in the morning, the teams were arriving and were being creepy, or just trying to sneak around to kidnap somebody or get the flag. So we all decided to stay awake but go into defense mode. We each stand guard in different locations, watching for any signs. After some time, we started hearing whistles from the deeper parts of the forest. We also started hearing what sounds like radios from different places. We saw some guys in white shirts running around the forest. Me and 2 other people decided to check the empty tents to see if there were people hiding in there, but we can't find anyone. We then start walking around and we heard laughter from a bush nearby. It sounded like a woman laughing, so we started laughing too as we thought we had heard the other scout team. Naturally, we walked to the bush without hesitation, though there was nobody there. Then we heard noises from another bush that was a little bit deeper in the woods. Then we heard a clear conversation from a few people speaking in a French accent. We could hear them so clearly that we checked but saw nothing. Then we saw a guy in a white t-shirt running fast again in front of us, but his speed was weird. He was running so fast it's as though he's sliding. Keep in mind we're in the woods at night with no lights. There's no way somebody can run like this without making a sound. Now somehow, the guy was running so quiet. It literally seemed like he was gliding. Again, we didn't feel threatened. We just had an adrenaline rush, but it was more excitement to catch them than anything else. After all, we just wanted to have fun. We were excited to see the teams again and have fun. For the next 2 or so hours, we kept hearing whistling and whispers in French, but we couldn't find a single person. It was so clear that there were a lot of people hiding around us, but we couldn't catch even one of them. The important thing to mention is that the arriving teams were not from France, so that was weird. Anyway, after 2 hours of running in the forest, I got tired. I didn't take this too seriously, so myself and a couple of friends went back to our tents. I laid down and after 10 minutes saw a car light speeding towards us. The area is not designed for regular cars to arrive. None of us actually had cars there. A bus from the near city would drop us off and pick us up there when the camp was over. We had a car coming straight towards our tents with a high beam on. It was coming so fast that we were frozen expecting it to actually hit us. It happened so quick that we can't even run. Then, suddenly it just stopped right near our tent. We heard the door open and no footsteps. Whoever it was just closes the door and left. We were shaken at that moment and it hit me that it couldn't have been anyone from the other teams. Now, we got out and learned that our teammates also had seen a jeep speeding towards our tent. We can't see anyone coming out of the car. After this, we decided to just stay awake until the morning. Throughout the entire night, we kept seeing these white-shirted men sliding around us. We couldn't see any faces, they were so fast and weird. We could hear loud laughs and whispers in French all around the camp. We could tell that there were a lot of strangers near the camp who were either messing around or trying to hurt us. The sun eventually came up and the strange thing stopped. We didn't manage to catch who it was or figure out why they were there or what they were doing, and in the morning the teams arrived. We had this leaderboard meeting every afternoon where we would discuss daily plans and meals. Also, we would share anything that was interesting. When all of the team leaders arrived in the morning, they didn't even realize what had happened to us the night before. Up to this day, I really have no idea who it was. I really have no idea who they were or exactly what their plans were. This occurred when I was about 15 or 16. I was also with a friend of about the same age and his dad. We were exploring the woods behind our houses. We lived in the same neighborhood. We went back into these woods many times to hike around and play paintball. One day though, we decided to go a little deeper in the woods just to check it out. A little background is that this is an old forest growth / protected wetlands area with a few square miles that are surrounded by roads on all 4 sides located in the northeast United States. For a while, we were wandering along. It was mid / late spring, so the forest is pretty lush and green, when one of us sees a small patch of white coming through the woods. I mean, it stood out quite easily in contrast to the green leaves, so we decided to investigate, and the 3 of us headed off in directions towards this mysterious white spot coming through the leaves. If you've ever walked through dense woods, you'll know how difficult it is to go in a straight line because of fallen logs and brush. Anyway, we keep walking towards this object for what seems like a while. But this object still hasn't come into focus. It looks like it's a white blob, and it's just getting further and further away from where we spotted it. We didn't think too much of it at this point, or at least I didn't, and continued walking in the direction of this thing. It must have happened 2 or 3 times that we'd walk towards this thing for a few minutes, stop and notice that we aren't getting any closer. Now by this point, I think there was a little tension building, but nothing out of the ordinary. At some point though, as we're getting closer, we do notice the object is starting to fill out. We can clearly see now that it's a tiny white house on a hill. I'd say the structure was about the size of a shed you might keep your lawnmower in. We were excited because how often do you come across something like that? It's still a little ways away, but again, very obvious that this little white house is what we had seen and were walking towards. So we continue towards the little house, and we lose sight of it momentarily as we go up over another hill, but as soon as we come to the top of the hill, the house is gone. Now we're really confused and both look at each other but keep walking up the hill that we've seen the house on. This last part happened pretty quickly. We get to the top of the hill, still looking at the other hills close by to see if maybe we just turn around or something and we'd see the little house, until one of us noticed an old foundation at the grounds where there obviously a house had once been. The shape of the foundation was exactly the size of this mysterious vanishing white house. I barely had time to notice the foundation when all three of us heard a growl, which sounds like it's getting louder until it's almost as loud as a chainsaw. Nothing was said, but the three of us, including my dad's friends, all sprint out of the woods in the direction that we've come. I don't recall ever discussing what happened to the two other friends I was with that day. Since this happened, I tried looking on Google Maps for some kind of indication that the house was there, but it's just a forest which is too thick. About a year and a half ago, I told my brother what happened and we went back into those woods looking for the house's foundation, but I didn't find anything. Although our search wasn't very thorough though. It was winter, so it's pretty cold and had snow on the ground. But it'd be hard to pick out where the house was meant to be because of the snow. Growing up, I'd spent much of my life playing outside with my friends. This is in the days before you had video games and things like that, so it was pretty normal to make your own fun. All I'd have to do is take my bike, and after riding for about an hour or so, I'd be with my friends. I know that sounds like a long time, but I lived out in the backwoods, miles away from cars, so it wasn't really dangerous and it didn't feel so long because you're out in the woods. Now, later in my career, I became a park ranger, so I kind of got used to weird people and weird situations, but this is something that I couldn't explain from my childhood. Now, this actually comes from a number of things that happened to me, which all led to one specific event. So let me begin. So, I was playing out with my friends on one particular day, and one of my friends swears that he's seen a house out in the woods, deep in the middle of nowhere, but he knows exactly where it is. He says, "God, there's a woman that haunts it and it's so scary. I really need you guys to see it." Now, we knew he wasn't making it up because when his brother came back from vacation, he was also saying the same thing. So one day we set out to find this. We had our bikes with us originally, but had to quickly dismount them. We decided to leave them because we knew it was going to be too difficult to proceed. There were rocks and things everywhere, so it was going to be really a headache to travel with them, so we decided not to. Now, we do notice some people further up also on bikes, and one, we have no idea how that they could have been on bikes out here because of how rough the terrain is, and two, we've seldom seen people here, so we thought it was a pretty bizarre thing, but we don't think too much of it and continue on. Now, funnily, this friend almost immediately gets lost and can't figure out where it is. He's basically adamant to not give up on trying to find it, but he doesn't really have a clue of where he's going. The nature's very nice though, but we're on quite a narrow path which is quite sheer. If you fell, you wouldn't really break anything, but you definitely get hurt. I've actually had the honour of falling in once and it wasn't fun. I ended up getting quite a lot of cuts and things and messed up some of my clothes, which was quite annoying. Now, after not too long, my friend finally gives up and says we're not going to find this place. I say yeah, that's fine, and we decide to start heading back. Now, I kid you not, just as we've started to turn around, we hear a really deep banshee type scream, one that echoes off the surrounding hills. It was far too loud to be a person, At the very least, it would have been a large animal, but upon listening to the scream over the 2 seconds it lasted, you could hear some distinct words being spoken, and that was to get out. It's very hard to really figure out exactly what this voice was saying because I had so much adrenaline that I just couldn't focus on what I was hearing. But I look at my friends, and my friend who then led us out there confirmed that yes, he actually heard the same thing. Now we're panicking. As you can imagine, being young kids, we basically scream too and sprint out in the opposite direction. The best part about this is that we don't really know where we're going, and we ended up getting more lost in the woods. Now, I ended up getting really bad because it starts to get dark, and one, I don't want to lose my bike. My parents have only just got me it, and growing up I really didn't have much money. So if I lost the bike it was going to be a big thing, but yeah, I really couldn't find it, and that was quite worrying. And two, I didn't want to be out here in the dark with the demon. And my parents were going to kill me if I wasn't back in time. Filled with more rage now, I start strutting around trying my very best to find where the bikes could be, and thankfully we found them. Now we all split off in our different directions, and none of us really say anything. We're just rushing to try and get back home. I've never pedalled so hard in my life because I was absolutely convinced that the demon thing was going to chase after me. I know now it could have just been a person out there, or maybe a large animal. That was probably the biggest threat, but I guess back then you really don't think like that. So I was pretty concerned by this, and I well and truly didn't feel comfortable. I just knew that I had to find my way home safely. So I get in and I get banned from being on my bike for a while, which was really annoying. I didn't really explain what had happened to my parents. I knew I was going to be grounded, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be a lot worse for me if I say what's actually happened. I know looking back on it now, I should have probably explained because it could have been a really dangerous situation. Who knows what was out there that day? Well, I'll tell you who doesn't know, me. So now fast forward a couple of months. My friend is still going on about us trying to find this place, and I kind of didn't want to this time. Normally I'm one of the real adventurers in the group, but I just couldn't be bothered. I didn't want to lose my bike luxuries again because I've just lost them, but he persists, and I guess we had nothing better to do, so I say sure. Now, I remember the day that we're going to set off again. He said that he knows the exact place this is. You know why? He said he had a dream about it. Being young, I really bought into this and thought, you know what, this time we're actually going to find it. So, we're riding down the path this time. We're actually on the more concrete area which leads into the main part of the forest, and we were going really quick. Next thing I know, I'm hitting the ground hard. My hands are stinging and something was off. I realised that I've crashed on my bike. I'd stupidly tried to go off onto what appeared to be a more flat part of the path, but I've gone straight over a big stone and ended up getting some cuts on myself. I didn't worry too much about it though. I was sat down for a while, and I tell my friends that they should just go on without me and that I need to get back home. I was young, but I was still quite concerned by this and ruining my clothes. I didn't want to get blood all over them. I know I have to get back to my mum. Now my friends, being the great friends they are, say sure and head off without me and leave me there. I look at the bike and it seems a little bit stuffed at first. I can't get the wheels to turn, so I ended up just laying there for a while. Now that's when I noticed someone. There's an elderly woman approaching. She's coming from just beyond the tree line up to my right. I look ahead and see if my friends are there to confirm if they're seeing this too, but they aren't. They're long gone. I'm a little bit worried now and very hastily get up and start trying to make my bike move. I'm trying to get the wheels to work, but I just can't seem to do it. For some reason I had a feeling that she was coming to help me, but She gets a little bit closer and just stops, smiling at me. Now she has some of the most jagged and rotten teeth that I've ever seen before. It's like this person had never seen a toothbrush in their life. Weirdly, their clothes didn't seem too dirty, considering that she's just come from the forest and surely they should have some markings on them. She's wearing a kind of dark coloured dress, but it looks pretty immaculate. If I had to guess her age, I'd say she's probably about 70 or 75. I'm not too sure. I wave at her and don't get anything back. I then say hello, and suddenly her expression changes, looking completely blank, almost like it's looking through me. Now that was creepy. I can't really make out much about her eyes because she has pretty bloodshot eyes, so I quickly get my bike, pick it up, and thankfully the wheels start moving while I'm walking. I look over my shoulder and I can still see her there watching me. For some reason I wasn't overwhelmed with fear by this, as I know a lot of people might be. This is kind of uncharacteristic for me too, because often I am the scaredy cat, but not in this situation. I start pedaling slowly at first, but I then see that she's still there staring at me, and as you can imagine I picked up the pace pretty promptly. Now I ended up getting back home, and my mum's very concerned about me. Annoyingly, she put this stinging stuff all over my cuts. I mean, it's probably antiseptic whatever, but my god did it burn like I've never felt a burn before. Honestly, it almost sent my whole body into shock how strong this stuff is. It was so much so that I'd actually forgot about what had happened until my mum asked again. I say I crashed over the stone, and then the lady come. Mum says, "What lady?" and asks me to describe her. And I explain everything that happened, and she looks at me kind of weird. She knows that there's no cars around there for miles. It's just the paths. You might get the odd truck, but it was very uncommon. She tells me that if ever I see that lady again, to come straight back and don't try and talk to her. I say, "But Mum, I couldn't even talk to her." I get the reply of, "I don't want to hear it." I'm then grounded and lose my bike privileges again. So it's starting to get quite irritating now. So not only are my friends out having this great adventure, I've crashed my bike on flat ground, hurt myself and got grounded again. I was pretty worried now because usually my mum does the 3 strikes and you're out kind of way of things. If I lose a bike again, I don't know if I'll see it again. So I'm pretty upset. Now eventually my mum does release me from her prison and I'm allowed to go out. And I catch up with my friends and ask them what happened. They then say that they still couldn't find it and I started laughing. They then ask why I'm not allowed on my bike and I explain and my friend says that's her. That's the lady who lives there. I say, "What do you mean?" He says, "The lady that haunts the house, you saw her." And I'm not buying any of it. I say, "The day I believe you is the day I see the house." And what happens? Nothing for the next 2 months. Until eventually I get my bike back and it's time to go out once more. In the time without my bike I'm actually super bored because I'm basically stuck indoors all day and I'm just watching the days go past. I did get some video games then, so I just killed hours on it, but it couldn't compete with being with my friends. Now, we decide that we're going to set out one last time to try and find this house. Again, I really don't believe it's there. I don't believe any of it's true, but my friend constantly goes on about it. So now, we get on that path once again, and this time I'm constantly scanning the ground. I'm very scared to go over another rock again and get hurt. It's not actually the feeling of crashing that actually bothers me, it's more the fact that I don't want to have a crash and get that stinging stuff on me. The thing was, at this point, even if we did find anything, I was sure to just lie about it, because I think, what's the point of telling my mom about what's happened if I'm only going to get grounded again? So I swear that no matter what happens, I'm not going to tell her anything. Now we were riding for miles and miles, and eventually my friend said, "Stop," and we all stop. He says, "Leave our bikes here." We take them off to the side and actually throw them into the bushes so people can't find them. They're pretty well concealed now, which is something we're all happy about. Now we get up and we start going through the woods on this little path. My friend is absolutely convinced and certain that this is the way that we need to go to be able to get away from everyone and finally find where this house is. He says, "This is it. This is what I found before." None of us really believed him, but I guess being gullible, part of us wanted it to be real. Now we walked for miles and miles, and we still don't seem to be getting any closer to anything. I tell him, "Really, is this actually a thing, or is it just a figure of your imagination?" He then says, "Be quiet." And I don't. I just keep on going until eventually, there it is. In a break in the trees, you can see an old white house. It kind of looked like an old English cottage, but slightly bigger. It certainly looked old and very abandoned. It was 2 stories tall, and looked like nobody had been there for as long as I had been alive, at least 5 times over. Now at this point I get a little freaked out, but my friend is persistent that we have to press forward to find it. We have to go in there. We have to know that it's real. I agreed, kind of getting more and more excited at this time. As we start to step towards it, a crow must have broke out of a tree nearby and it really made us jump. All of my friends are laughing at me for being so scared, but I don't know, I felt extremely on edge in this situation, and it's kind of like something I haven't felt before for a long time. Even working now as a ranger, I still haven't had that feeling. I think I was too on edge. I was too ready for something to happen. Now we go a little bit further ahead, and then I can see some kind of movement. It almost looks like there's a cat or something in one of the top windows moving round. It's all black, I can't see eyes, but I knew something was in there. I think maybe it's an animal. And we continue going forward. I don't know, I'm getting a really bad feeling about this, one of my friends says. But again, we say that we've come this far and that we need to figure out what this is. And so we press forward even more. Now eventually we get up to where the door was, and I, probably being the bravest at the time, decided to step in first. And this place smelled really weird. It was kind of like an old smell, one that I hadn't smelled before, and something smelled really bad in there. I didn't know what it was. I kept on and on searching for the source of the smell, but I really couldn't find anything. So that was something quite strange. I just expected either something to jump out at me constantly, or to see some kind of dead animal or thing there to make sense of the smell, but again, there's nothing. Now, I decided to go up the stairs to see what else is up there, and this place looks like it is from about the 1800s. There's no furniture or anything. There is a picture on the wall, but it's all faded off and you can't really see what it once was. I don't think it was a picture, but some kind of portrait, but it's gone now. I then see a big spider go up the wall, and I really don't like that. I'm looking for the cat though, and I can't find it. I think this is odd, so I continue my search. I was sure I saw something in here. Even if it wasn't a cat, I just had the urge to know exactly what it is and just figure out what was going on up here. Now, I end up going further ahead, and while my friends are down, I realise that there's an upstairs area. There are stairs that go up another level. I go up the stairs and I can see a suitcase. I don't see anything else there, and I decide that I'm going to open it up. I have to know what's in here. Even if it's bugs or something, I really want to know. As I go to open it, I hear a sound behind me. It's movement. I'm not bothered, I think that it's one of my friends, and I slowly turn around, and there I see it. A woman crouched in the corner, staring at me. I then realise this is a woman that I saw before, and she slowly smiles at me. I drop the suitcase down immediately. It startles me, but not her. One of my friends then joins me on the stairs and screams the second he sees a woman. Something about her didn't look real or human. The next thing I know, we're sprinting down those stairs. They felt impossibly long. It was almost like it had doubled in length. My other friends were also screaming now, and we all come flying out of the house, saying, "What was that? What on earth was that?" I say I don't know, and we start explaining to the others what we saw. One of my friends is constantly looking around, and he swears that he can see someone staring at us out of the window. We don't bother looking around. Me and the guy who saw it, we just keep running. We were surprisingly fit, as we probably made it about 500 meters before slowing down again. We all stopped for a moment, now feeling safe that we're away from the house, saying, "What did we see?" No, none of us can agree on exactly what we saw. We keep looking around to where the house is, but weirdly we can't find it. I know that we run off and we're quite worried and disorientated, but we should be able to see the house, so it doesn't make sense why it's not there. I start to kind of lurch backwards a bit as I realise that the fear's really taken a toll on me. It's like my vision's gone a bit weird. We then start moving again. We start running as quick as we can, and we're trying desperately to locate our bikes. We eventually come back to the main path, but our bikes are nowhere to be found. Of course not, how could we possibly find it out here? How are we going to be able to differentiate it from the surroundings when everything looks the same? We didn't think of this at the time. I didn't even care about the bike. Now the thing that makes this suck is it's going to be a long journey back without the bikes, but we just can't find them. I do want to search for a bit longer, but my friends are all too scared, and we take off running again. We don't get too far as we're really tired now, and we have to start walking. What's worse is we've got about 2 hours of daylight now ahead of us. We're all discussing, running through the probabilities of what it was, and suddenly I get annoyed at the friend saying, "Why didn't you tell me that was there?" He says, "I can't know what's up there, I've never been in there before." We all look at him then, kind of annoyed, as if to say, "Well, why didn't you let us know that before?" He doesn't reply though. And eventually, we get to the part where we have to split ways. We all say goodbye to each other, and then watch my friends go off in different directions. I don't know why, I just felt the need to stop there for a second or so, just to try and figure out, or at least make sense of what had happened, but I can't really make sense of anything. I then think, God, my bike, this isn't good. I'm going to be in so much trouble. And I start to fabricate an excuse to my mum as to what's happened to my bike, so at least then maybe she won't be too annoyed at me. It was stolen, that's it. I'm going to tell her it was stolen. Eventually, after a 2-hour walk, I get home just before the sunset. My mum can see me without my bike and says, "What happened?" And "It was stolen, Mum. I think a kid's stolen it." Weirdly, she wasn't annoyed at all. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, honey. We'll get you another one. Dinner's ready." I'm really surprised, and I take my food and go and sit in my room to eat it. Now fast forward to all these years later, and even in my current line of work, I've never seen anything so strange, and I still can't really make sense of it all. I don't know what I could have possibly seen up there. I'm just glad that I wasn't the only person to have seen it, and somebody else did, because if it was just me, I probably wouldn't have believed it.